Hello! In this video we're going to go over how to use keybinds in your Tkinter UIs. This is the example program that I've made. It's very simple. All you do is you input something into the entry box here, and then you click process button, and then that outputs it back. And it also prints it to the console as well. So we're going to change this so that you can use keybinds. Keybinds are really useful. They allow the user, it's more user friendly and allows a quicker user workflow. So let's get into implementing this. So first thing we need to do is go down to where we have our button. Now, keybinds can be bound to any widget, well, nearly all Tkinter widgets. So don't think that it's just for buttons. It can be used for labels, entry boxes, tree view widgets. The list goes on. So just bear that in mind. We might do a little bit of binding of other things as the video progresses. So here's our button. And as you can see right now, what makes it work is this command equals process. So this command tag makes it so that whenever we left click it, the process occurs, right? So that's useful, but what if we delete that, okay? So if we delete that, it's not very flexible, you see. So if we delete this and I'll run it, if I type in the same thing again and then click process, see, nothing happens. That's because the command is removed. So in order to reinstate this, we're going to have to add a bind. So we're going to say process button dot bind, okay? So the dot bind method takes two arguments, takes in the keystroke or user input that you want to capture, and then the function that occurs when that keystroke or whatever occurs. So that user input occurs. So there's dot bind. There's also dot bind underscore all. I'll briefly explain that. So dot bind is to the frame, but dot bind underscore all, I believe, covers the entire system. So even if the widget's not there, it'll still occur. So that would be useful if you were making like a help system and you wanted it to be accessible in any part of your program. You just press like an F1 key or something, and then that would pop up, and that would be that. But enough of that. So we're going to stick to dot bind, but do be aware that dot bind underscore all is there, and it's global, and it works the same way. So let's continue. So we're passing in button -1, okay. And then we're going to do comma, and then we're going to do process, which is the name of the method. Now, don't function, and don't see this. See the way my IDE is saying put the brackets around the function. Ignore that. Just ignore that, because if you do put the brackets around it, it means that the function's gonna actually trigger. So let's just leave going to trigger like when you run the program initially. So let's not do that. Okay. So if we run this now, we're going to get an error. And this error says, process, the function takes 0 positional arguments, but 1 was given. What does that mean? Well, it means that when we called the function, we passed it 1 argument, but it didn't expect any arguments. And that's true. We didn't expect any arguments in this bracket here. So what are we passing? Because it doesn't look like we're passing anything there. Well, actually, when you use dot bind, you're actually going to be passing information about the event to the function. So that's what the argument is. So we call it event, and since now we're accepting it, whenever we run this and type in something, we click process. There we go. It still works. We've retained the functionality of the system there, but we've removed the command. The command in buttons is restricted to just the left click, so we don't really want that, and it will conflict with other keybinds. If you have it, leave it in there. So we'll have that as that. So Okay, that works. So, what is in this event? What is the lovely data that we get from this event being passed in? Well, I will show you. There's a lot of information, but I'm going to show you just the 4 bits that are important, in my opinion. And yeah, so we'll do that. So we'll say event.time, event.character, print event.type, print event.widget. Now, okay, so what are these? Right, well, we'll run the program and we'll find out. So here we go. So ignore this because that's obviously the output from get data. So this is it here. So our first attribute .time returns this number here. Now there's a way of converting. So this is the time in which the event occurred. So yeah, and you can then translate that back to clock time, which is the readable time, but it's not very well supported by Tkinter. And if you were wanting to track when the button was pressed, you'd be better doing time.now, for example. But this is useful if you want to measure the precise milliseconds or seconds between inputs. So that's what that's used for. Now, character. Now, since we did a button, like a left-click button press, there's no character associated with this. But if we used a key like K or L or T, that would appear there, so you would be able to discern the actual key that was pressed. Button press is the type. So you can have different things like button press, mouse overs. We'll cover all this later on, but that's just going to distinguish between sort of keyboard input and mouse input. And then finally we've got the .widget. So this is the widget in which the event occurred, and I'll give you like a path to the widget. So the root is obviously the dot, so that's our root widget, and then I have an interface frame, which is here. So that's why we've got the frame there, because the button is being put onto that frame. So that's why we have !frame dot ! button. So that'll tell you where the event occurred at. And then we can also do there's also event.x and event.y. So what are these? Well, these are going to give you the coordinates of the mouse when the button's pressed, essentially. But it also works for keybinds, but it's not very useful because it will always give the same results. That's why I was kind of hesitant. But we can have it in there anyway because it's not going to do any harm. Although that returns I think it returns if I just double check here, I think that returns an integer. So, oh yeah, okay, but it's fine to be printed. That's fine. So you can see that whenever I click the button, the values change, the X and Y values change relative to the button. So yeah, so that's the X and Y values there. They are useful. They are useful to track whereabouts the user pressed, which is useful. So that's sort of like the useful event information. There's other stuff in there as well, but that's kind of like the main stuff there. So we've gone over sort of like how to make a keybind, essentially, and now we're going to go over the sort of user inputs you can track. So I'm going to do I'm going to go over the button -1 first. So you saw button -1 was left click. So button 1 is the leftmost button, button 2 is the middle button, and button 3 is the rightmost button. So the middle mouse button, it's not really it's kind of a leftover from previous generations of computers. So not all mice have middle mouse buttons. some do, some don't. So typically I would try and avoid the middle mouse button, but that's button 2. Now button 3 is right click. So when we run this, we can do right click, and that'll do the call the function. Now if I left click, the button's still gonna sync in, and that's kind of an innate process of the button. So that's why that's occurring. But if I right click, that's when the actual function occurs. So that's button 3. Button 2 is the middle mouse button. Button 4 and 5 are mouse wheel support for Linux. So if you wanted to do scrolling up, scrolling down on the button, you could do that. But I wouldn't really advise doing that because it's only for Linux, only supported under Linux. So I would just go for button 1 or button 3, to be honest. In that, following that, if we do button release, and then dash your number, you can then instead of the function occurring whenever the button is pressed, it'll be whenever the button's released. So right now I'm holding it, and then there we go, release the button, and then it's a button release, and then it prints out everything, okay? So holding it, nothing's occurring, released, there we go. So we can do that. You can also do that for 2, 3, 4, and 5, and of course it's all the same. So button 3 would be your right click. So do that again, and then right click, and then there we, oh sorry, I think I left clicked there. Oh, there we go. There you go. So there it is working there. Right click, and then yeah, there we go. Lovely. So that's the button release. Arguably that's a better one for buttons, because if the user doesn't want, say the user presses the button and pulls away, say they submit data in and they accidentally did it, but they already pressed the button, they can remove the button at the mouse, and then it'll it means it won't be submitted. Do you know what I mean? So it's only on release. Okay. And finally, on the mouse buttons, if you do for a bit, if you do just do put 1 here, then that's shorthand for the left mouse button, because of course that's assigned to 1. Oh, sorry, no, sorry, you have to have it in the chevrons, obviously. So sorry about that. But yes, if you do the 1, yeah. It still works the same, and then 3 is still the same, and 2 and 4 and 5 are all the same as well. So there you go. So that works. That's good. Okay, so that's how that all works. Okay. So we'll go now onto motion. I think we'll go on to motion. We'll do motion now. We'll do motion. So B1-motion stands for button 1-motion. Okay, so that means, what does that mean? Well, it means that the function will trigger whenever the mouse is moved over the button or whatever widget you bind. Again, remember, you can bind it to nearly any Tkinter widget, and then it will trigger, but the left mouse button has to be held down. So when I move, I'm not holding the left mouse button down, so this is fine. So it's not going to trigger. But if I hold the left mouse button and then mouse over, there you go. See the way that triggers multiple times? Because I'm holding the left mouse button down, I'm moving over the button, and thus it's triggering a whole load of times. Okay? Right, and then you can obviously do button 1, button 3, button 2, button 5, you know. So that's the motion there. And then if you want just motion in general, you can do dash the chevron motion, and then if you run it now, you can just do it. Now I'm not holding anything down here, okay, and it works. So anytime I move the button, but if I move the button in and out, it still triggers. So there you go. That's that one. Okay, now that's motion covered, I think. And then double button. So you can do this as like double clicking. So you do double dash button dash 1, and then obviously you can support 2 and 3 and 4 and all that. So if we do this, if I left click once, it's not going to work, but if I double click, that'll work there as well. You can also do a triple click. So let's do that. Let's do a triple click. Triple. There we go. Run this now. 1, 2 doesn't work. 1 doesn't work. 1, 2, 3 does work there. So that's triple click. Okay, that's that. And then, is there any more mouse ones we can think about? There's mouse wheel. So mouse wheel would be the one you would use for, remember I mentioned button 4 and 5 being the mouse wheel for Linux. If you want to do mouse wheel stuff, you can also use this, which works from Windows and Mac, but doesn't work for Linux. That's why you use button 4 and button 5 for Linux. So I don't know if this will work because I'm on a trackpad here. So oh, there we go. Okay, all right. So yeah, so that's what's happening there. So I'm going up, and that'll trigger it, and down. And of course, it's more sensitive to me because I'm using a trackpad for this. But if you had a normal mouse, it would be a bit more precise. So don't worry why it's firing sometimes. Anyway, and then of course, yeah. So that's the mouse wheel. Okay. So now where did we get to? So we're on to enter and leaving. Okay, so enter. Again, sorry, this is all to do with the mouse, but we're getting to the keys. But it's important to go through every sort of possibility. So we'll go through the keys, not the keys, the enter and leaving. So again, putting in our information. Now we have enter on here. So if we enter the mouse into the button, that's gonna trigger the function. Okay, if we leave, that's fine, but if we keep going in and out, so it's being triggered on the in. Likewise, if we do leave, we can do whenever I move the button in, that's fine, the mouse in, but if I leave, that's going to trigger. Okay, so yes, that's the leave there. So now we're going to do the focus in and focus out. So what does this mean? Focus in, right? So focus in terms of Tkinter is like keyboard focus. Whenever you tab through a form and you go through each entry box, that is focus, essentially. So what I mean by this is, if I press tab now, I'm focused now in this entry box. If I press tab again, I'm focused in on this process, on the process button, and as a result of that, I am now tabbed in, and it's going to trigger because I've bound it to focus in. And then obviously then it's kind of like enter and leave, but instead of the mouse being used, it's the keyboard focus. So if I do that and then I enter and then I leave, it's gonna trigger. So that's the focus in and focus out explained there quickly. So okay, so now we're going to go over the sort of keys now, which is great because we're in Keybinds. You'd think, sorry, in a keybind video you would want the keys instead of all these buttons and focuses, but yeah, here we go. So return. So what is return? Well, okay, so in Tkinter, not every key is called by its name. So you know the enter key, it's called the return key. Now I know that's synonymous, but for Tkinter you have to use return, because enter is already being used as previous in the mouse pointer when we're entering a thing in there. So that's the enter key. There's also backspace tab, return. already meant Shift_L, Control L, Alt L, pause, caps lock, escape, next, end, home, left, up, right, down, print, insert, delete, F1, F2, F3, F4, F5, F6, F7, F8, F9, F10, F11, F12, numlock, and scroll lock. Those keys are special keys because they're not represented, they're not letters essentially, they're like more like functions. So return will if we have this here and then we do and then okay, so return is the enter button, synonymous. So if we tab into the enter button and then we have to be selecting the enter button in order for this to work, and then you press enter, the enter button works there. Same for all the other keys there. So you have to be in the button there and then press enter. Unless you do bind_all, which is what I recommend. But anyway, yeah. So you're gonna like F3, F5. So like if I change this to F2, then if I run this again and then press the F2 button, there we go. That works there. Okay, so that's our keys there. There are special keys. Now, if you want a generic key bind, so this is like any key, you just do this key, and then if we select that in there and then do any sort of key, that'll work. And you can see that our character event.car is returning whatever key was pressed there. Okay, and then if you want a specific key, let's say the G key, I want to bind the process to the G key, I can do this, and then tab in and press G, and then that works there. I'm only pressing the G. If I press D, C, V, B, N, M, it doesn't work, but if I press G, there you go, it works there. Now you can also bind a combination. Now note there that we didn't actually have the chevrons. There are more than or greater than signs, or more than or less than signs, because Tkinter can process just one character thing, so that's fine. Now you can do like combinations, so you can have ShiftUp, Shift-up. So that's a combination of the user pressing the up arrow when the Shift key is pressed. So let's run that and see if that works. If we go to this and then do Shift Up, there we go. So that's Shift Up, Shift Up. If I press the up button, that's not working, but if I press Shift and then up, that'll work. Now, this Shift, it can be replaced, this prefix can be replaced with Alt or Control. And again, this up arrow can be pressed with down, it can be pressed with a letter, you can be pressed with anything, really. It's just a prefix. You know, a Control C, Control V, you know, that's how that all works with the combination. Similar to key, you can also have KeyRelease, so KeyRelease. So whenever we run this, and then hold in, that works there because whenever I tab in and release the tab button, that's a key release. So if I press like G and then release, that'll work. D and then release, that'll work. V and then release, that'll work. You know, so that's any generic key being released there. Okay. Yeah, so that's it for all of the keybinds you can use there in this area here. Now there's also binds for whenever a widget is destroyed or whenever it's created, but that's not being covered in the scope. This is literally only for user inputs. Yes, so that is the binding done. Now I did say that I would show a different widget being bound, so I'll show that to you now. Okay, so I said I would do some binding on entry boxes, so here it is here. First entry dot bind, and then the enter tag, which as we know is when we move our mouse pointer in, and then color change is a new function I've written, and then leave will also call color change. Now we're combining essentially everything that we've learnt so far. So this is our function, which is passing in the event. thing, the event object, and it's saying event.type, and we're casting that to toString, is equal to enter. So essentially what that means is if we've entered the entry box, we're going to change the entry box to blue, and if we've left it, then we're going to change it to white. The reason why we have to cast this as a string is because event.type returns an event type object. So in order to make this work, we're going to need to cast it as a string to produce the leave, essentially. So when we run it, we can see that if we mouse in, we can see that the entry box changes color, and then if we mouse out, that works. So yeah, that's pretty cool, isn't it? You can mouse in, and then you know it's working. You know that you've clicked in, and then you can type in whatever you want, and then process, and then there you go. It's pretty nice. It's pretty cool. This won't work with the tab because, of course, I've only used enter and leave. You would have to then use focus in and focus out in order to do it with the tab, but I'll let you do that yourselves as we exercise to try and improve this by using instead of just having the mouse focus, you could have the keyboard focus as well being used. Alright then, I know this was a long video, but I'm glad that I got through all of the keybinds and what they all do. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.